After 4 years away, former Coast Guard rescuer Daniel Brooks finally came home, only to find his loyal canine, Nova, starving beside a frozen harbor. But the meat in her mouth wasn't for her. With a chain scar around her neck and terror in her eyes, Nova led Daniel toward an abandoned boat shed his family once owned. Beneath the rotting floorboards, something was still breathing. And when Daniel uncovered the dying puppy hidden below, he also found evidence of a betrayal that began inside his own home, and a powerful man willing to kill to keep the truth buried under the ice. Snow moved sideways across Interstate 35 as Daniel Brooks drove north toward Duluth in an aging dark green Ford Bronco. The heater coughed warm air against the windshield, barely keeping a clear strip through the frost. Beyond the glass, Lake Superior had disappeared behind a wall of white. Road signs emerged without warning and vanished again in the rearview mirror. Daniel kept both hands on the steering wheel, his shoulders slightly forward, as though the storm were something he could physically push through. At 42, Daniel was still a tall man, just over 6 feet, but 4 difficult years had stripped away much of the strength that once made him look unbreakable. He had broad shoulders, a narrow waist, and a weathered face marked by sleepless nights. His dark brown hair was cut short, with silver beginning near his temples. A pale scar ran from the edge of his right jaw toward his neck, a reminder of the rescue mission that had ended his career with the United States Coast Guard. His left knee stiffened in cold weather, and 2 fingers on his right hand sometimes went numb without warning. Neither injury bothered him as much as the memories. Daniel had once been easy with people. He had laughed loudly, trusted quickly, and believed every emergency could be solved if someone strong enough arrived in time. After a failed rescue in the North Atlantic left 2 members of his crew dead and Daniel trapped inside a damaged vessel for nearly 11 hours, that part of him had changed. He now spoke carefully, observed everything, and trusted actions more than promises. 4 years of surgery, rehabilitation, and legal reviews had kept him away from home longer than anyone had expected. Now he was returning to the 3 things that had survived in his mind: his wife Emily, his Belgian Malinois Nova, and Brooks Marine, the boatyard his father had built along the frozen harbor. A faded photograph rested above the dashboard. In it, Emily stood beside Daniel near the boatyard's blue workshop door. She was 35 in the photograph, with shoulder-length blonde hair, clear blue eyes, and a smile that had once made Daniel feel that every road eventually led somewhere safe. Emily had always been organized, patient, and practical, the person who remembered appointments and paid bills before they became problems. Yet her letters had grown less frequent during Daniel's final year away. When he called, she sounded tired and distracted. Beside her in the photograph stood Nova. Nova had been young then, a powerful sable Belgian Malinois with a black mask, upright ears, and intelligent amber eyes. She had worked in formal search drills with Daniel around the harbor, and possessed the restless energy of a creature that considered stillness a personal failure. She was loyal but independent, affectionate without being needy, and suspicious of anyone who approached Daniel too quickly. Daniel touched the worn photograph with one gloved finger. "Almost home," he said. The storm thickened as he entered Duluth. Streetlights glowed inside the snow like distant candles. Most storefronts were closed, their windows dark behind curtains of ice. Daniel passed the turn toward Mercer Avenue, then slowed when he noticed a weak yellow sign ahead. Bell's Harbor Diner. Hot food, hot coffee, no excuses. The diner stood between a bait shop and an abandoned storage building. Daniel remembered it from childhood, though the red paint had faded and the roof sagged beneath the snow. He pulled over, partly because he needed coffee, and partly because the Bronco's engine had begun making a sound he did not trust. As he stepped outside, the wind struck him hard enough to steal his breath. Then something moved beside the diner's trash enclosure. Daniel stopped. A thin animal lowered its head behind a metal bin. At first, he saw only a narrow back covered in dirty sable fur. The animal pushed its muzzle beneath a torn garbage bag and pulled out a strip of cooked meat. The dog turned. Daniel forgot the cold. Nova? The Belgian Malinois froze. Her body looked painfully different from the one preserved in the photograph. Her ribs showed clearly beneath a dull, matted coat. One rear leg remained slightly lifted, and her weight shifted unevenly across the other three. The black fur around her muzzle had gone gray in patches. Deep red marks circled her neck, some healed and others still raw. But her eyes were the same, amber, watchful, unmistakable. Daniel took one step forward. Nova backed away. The reaction struck harder than if she had bitten him. "It's me," he said quietly. "Easy, girl." He lowered himself slowly, ignoring the sharp pain in his knee. Nova watched every movement. Snow gathered along her spine, but she did not shake it away. The meat remained clenched between her teeth. Daniel held out his hand. For several seconds, neither of them moved. Then Nova approached with small, uncertain steps. Her injured rear paw dragged through the snow. She stopped just beyond Daniel's reach and lifted her nose toward him. Recognition passed across her face, but it did not become excitement. There was no leap, no bark, no frantic wagging tail. Only exhaustion. Only caution. Only a desperate need that seemed more important than their reunion. The diner's back door opened. Ruth Bell stepped into the alley, carrying a dish towel over one shoulder and a cast-iron pan in one hand. She was 68, short and broad, with thick silver hair tied behind her head. Her lined face gave the impression that she had spent most of her life refusing to be intimidated. Ruth wore a red wool sweater beneath a flour-stained apron and treated kindness like practical work rather than a performance. "You know that dog?" she asked. Daniel kept his attention on Nova. "She's mine." Ruth's expression changed. "She's been coming here for a week," she said. "Always before sunrise or just after closing. Takes whatever she can carry." Daniel looked at the meat in Nova's mouth. "She looks like she hasn't eaten in days." "That's the strange part." Ruth lowered the pan. "She doesn't eat here. She takes the food toward the old waterfront road, every time." Nova turned her head toward the harbor. A black SUV appeared at the far end of the street. Its windows were dark, and a silver logo was printed across the front door. Holloway Waterfront Group. Nova's reaction was immediate. Her body dropped close to the ground. The meat fell from her mouth. Her ears flattened, and a violent tremor moved through her thin frame. She tried to retreat behind Daniel, but nearly collapsed when her injured leg failed. Daniel caught her beneath the chest. The SUV slowed as it passed the diner. Daniel could not see the driver clearly, but he felt someone watching them from behind the tinted glass. Then the vehicle accelerated and disappeared into the storm. "Who are they?" he asked. Ruth's jaw tightened. "People who have been measuring property they don't own yet." A faint sound came from the storage building behind the diner. Daniel turned. Through a narrow gap in the door, he saw the face of a teenage boy. Caleb Price was 17, painfully thin and several inches short of Daniel. He had curly brown hair hanging over wary green eyes and wore an oversized army surplus coat. His expression belonged to someone who had learned to observe adults before deciding whether they were dangerous. Caleb had been sleeping in Ruth's storeroom for several weeks, though she described the arrangement as helping with inventory to preserve his dignity. When Daniel noticed him, Caleb immediately stepped back into the shadows. "He's harmless," Ruth said. "Mostly." Daniel returned his attention to Nova. As he gently examined her neck, his fingers found something hidden beneath the dirty fur. Nova's old identification collar was gone. In its place, a short length of rusted wire had been twisted loosely around her neck. The metal had cut into the skin every time she pulled against it. Daniel's breathing slowed. That was what happened when anger became dangerous. It did not always become louder. Sometimes it became very quiet. He carefully removed the wire and placed it in his coat pocket. Nova picked up the strip of meat again. Instead of eating it, she turned toward the harbor and limped several steps into the snow. Then she stopped. She looked back at Daniel. Once. Twice. Her eyes moved from him to the distant outline of Brooks Marine. She was not asking him to take her home. She was asking him to follow. Daniel wanted to follow Nova toward Brooks Marine immediately, but she barely made it 10 yards before her injured leg folded beneath her. He caught her before she struck the frozen pavement. The strip of meat remained clenched between her teeth, even as her body trembled against his arms. Whatever waited near the waterfront mattered enough for her to ignore hunger, pain, and the return of the man she had once followed everywhere. Daniel understood urgency, but he also understood the difference between courage and collapse. He carried Nova back to the Bronco while Ruth Bell called the only veterinary clinic still open during the storm. Caleb watched from the storeroom doorway, his oversized coat wrapped tightly around his narrow frame. The boy said nothing, but Daniel noticed that his eyes stayed fixed on the rusted wire protruding from Daniel's pocket. North Shore Animal Clinic stood 3 blocks uphill from the harbor, inside a converted brick house with a green awning bent under the weight of snow. Daniel entered with Nova wrapped in 2 blankets Ruth had taken from the diner. The clinic smelled of disinfectant, wet fur, and coffee left too long on a warming plate. Dr. Maya Torres met him in the examination room before the receptionist could finish asking his name. Maya was 38, medium height and lean, with warm brown skin, dark eyes, and thick black hair gathered into a practical braid. She wore navy scrubs beneath a gray fleece jacket, and a small crescent-shaped scar marked the underside of her chin. Daniel remembered her as the young veterinarian who had once helped train volunteer search dogs near the harbor. Time had made her movements more deliberate, but had not taken the directness from her voice. Maya treated frightened animals with patience and frightened people with facts, believing both responded badly to false comfort. "Put her here," Maya said, spreading warmed towels over the metal table. Nova resisted when Daniel tried to lower her. Her claws caught his jacket and the strip of meat dropped onto the floor. Daniel kept one hand under her chest while Maya examined her gums, eyes, ribs, and injured leg. Nova did not growl, but every touch made her muscles tighten. Daniel spoke quietly beside her ear until she allowed Maya to lift the damaged fur around her neck. The marks were worse beneath the dirt. Several narrow wounds circled Nova's throat, some scabbed over and others newly torn. Maya measured the spacing with gloved fingers, then looked at the rusted wire Daniel had removed. "This wasn't from a normal collar," she said. "Something thin was cutting into her whenever she pulled away." "How long?" "Weeks at least, possibly longer." Maya checked Nova's temperature, drew blood, and began administering warmed fluids beneath the skin. She explained that Nova was severely underweight and dehydrated. The injury to her rear leg appeared older than the abrasions on her neck, suggesting she had survived without treatment for some time. Daniel listened without interrupting, storing each fact separately because anger made details easier to lose. Maya ran her hands carefully along Nova's abdomen and paused. Her expression changed, not dramatically, but enough for Daniel to notice. "What is it?" "She gave birth recently." Daniel looked at Nova. Her head rested against his sleeve, but her amber eyes remained open. "How recently?" "Probably within the last few weeks." Her body is still producing milk, though not much in her condition. Maya glanced at the uneaten meat on the floor. That food wasn't for her. The answer struck Daniel with the force of something he had already known, but refused to name. Somewhere near Brooks Marine, a puppy, or several, could be waiting in the cold for a mother who had crossed half the city to find food. Maya warned him that newborn puppies could survive only a limited time without warmth, but Nova was too unstable to be taken into the storm immediately. She offered a shallow bowl containing softened food. Nova sniffed it, took one mouthful, then turned toward the clinic door. When Daniel blocked her path, she dragged herself to the threshold and scratched at it. "Nova," he crouched beside her. "You can't go yet." She looked past him toward the waterfront. Maya collected debris from between Nova's paw pads with tweezers. She placed each fragment on a white cloth. Pale wood dust, a sliver of dried straw, and a smear of dark machine oil. Daniel knew the odor. His father's workshop had always smelled of cedar shavings, marine grease, and old rope. "She's been inside an industrial building," Maya said. "Somewhere with unfinished wood and machinery." "Brooks Marine." Maya studied him. "Your family's boatyard?" Daniel nodded. After the fluids had begun to steady Nova's breathing, Maya allowed Daniel to take her, on the condition that he kept her warm and returned immediately if she collapsed again. She gave him medication, feeding instructions, and an emergency heat blanket. Nova refused to leave the strip of meat behind, so Daniel wrapped it in paper and placed it beside her in the Bronco. The Brooks home stood on a bluff above the harbor, less than a quarter-mile from the boatyard. Daniel saw the new fencing before he saw the house. Steel posts divided part of the property, and orange survey flags moved violently in the wind. A white sign attached to the fence read, "Future Waterfront Assessment, Holloway Waterfront Group." The words looked temporary, but the posts had been driven deep. Daniel parked beside the porch. A light appeared behind the curtains before he reached the steps. Emily Brooks opened the door. She was 39 now, tall and slender, with shoulder-length blonde hair that had once fallen in loose waves, but was now pulled into a hurried knot. Her blue eyes looked larger in a face made thinner by exhaustion. She wore a cream sweater, dark jeans, and no shoes, as though she had been moving through the house without expecting anyone to arrive. Emily had always been composed around other people, skilled at smoothing conflict before it became visible. After Daniel disappeared into military hospitals and administrative reviews, her messages had gradually become shorter and more guarded. Standing before him now, she looked like a woman who had spent years holding something closed with both hands. For one moment, neither of them spoke. Then Emily stepped forward and gripped the front of his coat. "You're here." Her voice broke against his chest. Daniel held her carefully. He could feel how thin she had become, but before he could ask what had happened, Nova shifted beneath the blanket in his arms. Emily pulled back. The emotion in her face changed too quickly for Daniel to identify. Relief remained, but fear moved beneath it. "You found her," she said. Nova's body tightened. She twisted weakly toward Daniel and pressed herself against his side. She did not bark or show her teeth. She simply trembled. Emily stopped reaching for her. "I thought she was dead," she said. "She ran away months ago. I looked everywhere." Daniel carried Nova into the house. The living room had been rearranged, and several of his father's framed harbor photographs were gone. Near the kitchen door stood 2 stainless steel bowls with price labels still attached underneath. Beside them lay a thick dog bed without a single hair pressed into its fabric. Daniel looked from the new supplies to Emily. "When did you buy these?" "A while ago." "They've never been used." Emily folded her arms. "I replaced the old ones after Nova disappeared." I thought you might come back." Daniel did not challenge her immediately. He set Nova on the rug and watched her crawl behind his legs. A dog missing for months would not have fresh injuries from prolonged confinement. A woman who believed that dog was dead would not normally arrange untouched bowls near the door just before her husband returned. Daniel had once trusted Emily because she spoke calmly. Now he listened to what her calmness was trying to cover. A knock sounded against the side window. Caleb stood outside in the snow. Daniel stepped onto the porch and closed the door behind him. The boy's curly hair was damp beneath a wool cap Ruth had apparently forced him to wear. Up close, he looked younger than 17, though caution had settled permanently around his eyes. "I saw the dog before she started coming to the diner," Caleb said. "When?" "Maybe 3 weeks ago, near your boatyard." Daniel waited. "There was a man with her. Big guy, red knit cap." Caleb rubbed his hands together. "He had a rope around her neck. She wouldn't move, so he dragged her toward the old storage shed." "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Caleb looked toward the fenced property. "People around here hear things. They just decide which things are expensive to notice." Before Daniel could ask more, Nova scratched at the front door from inside. Once, then again. He returned to her and opened it. Nova stood unsteadily in the hallway, her nose lifted toward Brooks Marine. Beyond the house, the survey flags snapped against the darkening sky, and the old storage shed waited behind the new fence. Daniel looked at the clinic medication in his hand, the untouched dog bed near Emily's feet, and the shadowed boatyard below. Nova had shown him where to look. Now he had to learn what had been done there. Nova did not wait for Daniel to decide. The moment he opened the front door, she limped into the snow and turned downhill toward Brooks Marine. Her rear leg dragged with every third step, and the emergency blanket Daniel had wrapped around her shoulders slipped sideways in the wind. He caught up, lifted her carefully, and felt her body tense, not because she wanted to escape him, but because she could no longer see the boatyard from his arms. "I'm taking you there," he said. "You don't have to prove anything else." Emily remained in the doorway behind them, one hand gripping the frame. Daniel could feel her watching, but he did not look back. He called Maya instead. 15 minutes later, the veterinarian's gray Subaru appeared through the snow with its hazard lights blinking. Caleb arrived on foot from the direction of Bell's Harbor Diner, wearing the same oversized military coat and carrying an old flashlight. "You should go back to Ruth," Daniel told him. Caleb looked past him toward the fenced boatyard. "The man in the red cap came through here more than once." That was not an answer, but Daniel recognized the tone. Caleb had already decided to follow. Forcing him away would only make him return alone. Maya stepped from her vehicle carrying a medical bag and a folded thermal carrier. Snow gathered on her dark braid as she studied Nova. "She should be resting." "She won't." "I noticed." Maya did not waste time arguing. Her practical nature had been sharpened by years of treating animals brought in too late by owners who had mistaken delay for hope. She checked Nova's breathing, secured the blanket more tightly, and gave Daniel a look that made the conditions clear. "If she collapses, I take control." Daniel nodded. They crossed the new fence where one section had not yet been locked. Orange survey flags snapped against the steel posts, and the Holloway waterfront sign rattled in the wind. Brooks Marine lay below them, half hidden by blowing snow. The main workshop was a long blue building with boarded windows. Beyond it stood the old storage shed near Lake Superior, its roof bent low beneath the storm. Daniel had spent much of his childhood there. His father, Thomas Brooks, had built the shed before Daniel was born, using thick cedar boards and salvaged iron from a decommissioned ferry. Thomas had been a quiet, heavy-handed man with a gray beard and a habit of repairing objects long after other people would have thrown them away. He had taught Daniel that boats, dogs, and frightened people all revealed their problems through sound if someone listened long enough. The old shed now looked like something everyone had stopped listening to. Nova struggled in Daniel's arms as they approached. He lowered her onto the snow several yards from the entrance. She moved forward immediately, then stopped at the threshold. Her ears flattened. Her body leaned toward the darkness while her paws pressed backward into the snow. Daniel crouched beside her. "This is where they kept you." Nova stared through the doorway. A low tremor moved beneath her ribs. She did not enter. Maya raised her flashlight. "Don't force her." "I won't." Caleb stood a few feet behind them, breathing through his mouth. The usual guarded look had left his face. In its place was something younger and more frightened. The shed door had swollen inside its frame. Daniel pushed slowly until the wood scraped open. Cold air moved out, carrying the smell of machine oil, damp straw, rust, and animal waste. Nova lowered herself to the ground. Then Daniel heard it. At first, he thought it was wind passing through a crack in the wall. The sound came again, thin, broken, and barely alive. A whimper. Maya heard it too. Under us. They entered carefully. The floorboards groaned beneath Daniel's boots. His flashlight crossed overturned buckets, rotting rope, damaged propellers, and a stack of wooden crates marked with the Holloway Waterfront logo. The cry came once more from the rear corner. Daniel knelt and pressed his palm against the floor. One board felt colder than the others. Its nails had been removed and replaced recently. He used a pry bar from the wall, lifting the plank a fraction at a time, while Maya warned Caleb to stay back. Beneath the floor was an old maintenance compartment, once used to access pipes running toward the lake. Someone had filled part of it with straw and torn insulation. Maya dropped to her knees beside Daniel. Together, they removed 2 more boards. A tiny body lay inside the hollow. The Belgian Malinois puppy was scarcely larger than Daniel's 2 hands. Its sable coat was wet and flattened against its skin, and a dark mask covered its narrow muzzle. Its eyes were still sealed. The puppy's chest rose in weak, uneven movements. "Alive," Maya said. "Barely." She reached into the compartment, wrapped the puppy in a warmed silver cloth, and placed it against a chemical heat pack inside the carrier. Her movements were fast but controlled. "Male," she said. "Very young. Probably less than 3 weeks." Nova heard the puppy's cry and stepped inside. Her fear did not disappear. Daniel saw it in the way she kept her body low and avoided the left wall. But she crossed the threshold and dragged herself toward Maya. She touched her nose to the puppy's head, then sank onto the floor. Maya positioned the carrier near her. "He needs a name for the chart," she said. Caleb looked at the small life blinking beneath the thermal cloth. "Beacon." Daniel glanced at him. Caleb shrugged without taking his eyes off the puppy. "He made enough noise for us to find him." "Beacon," Maya agreed. Daniel examined the compartment. There were several shallow depressions in the straw, not just one. Some still held small patches of dark fur. Nova had given birth to more than one puppy. Daniel did not ask Maya what had happened to the others. The absence answered for her. Along the left wall, an iron ring had been bolted into one of the cedar beams. A length of chain lay beneath it, thin enough to explain the wounds around Nova's neck. Beside the chain stood a metal water bowl filled with solid ice. Scratch marks covered the wall below the ring, some deep enough to expose pale wood. Daniel photographed everything before touching it. The chain, the bowl, the iron ring, the damaged floor, the empty shapes in the straw. Each picture made his anger colder. Behind him, Caleb opened an old red toolbox. He stared inside, then pulled out a compact digital camera with a cracked screen. "That's Owen's." Daniel turned. "Your brother?" Caleb nodded. Owen Price had been 24 when he disappeared 8 months earlier. According to Caleb, he had been tall and broad-shouldered, with the same green eyes but none of his younger brother's caution. Owen worked seasonal construction jobs, talked too quickly when excited, and believed confronting bad people was the same as defeating them. He had briefly worked for Holloway Waterfront Group before vanishing without explanation. Caleb pressed the power button. Nothing happened. He opened the battery compartment, then removed a small memory card. "This might still work." Daniel examined it without taking it from him. "Do you know the password?" Caleb's expression tightened. "No. Owen protected everything after he started working here." A soft scraping sound came from the far side of the shed. Nova pushed her nose beneath the straw near the wall and pulled out a worn leather cord. A metal pendant hung from it. Caleb dropped to one knee. The pendant was shaped like a small silver anchor. Owen wore that every day. His voice had lost all its hardness. Daniel placed the necklace in a clean evidence bag from Maya's kit. The discovery did not prove Owen had been harmed there, but it proved he had been inside the shed, and that someone had hidden something connected to him beneath Nova's nest. Maya was inspecting one of the Holloway crates. Its lid had been secured with new screws. Daniel opened it using a screwdriver from the toolbox. Inside were several sealed glass jars containing black soil and cloudy liquid. One jar had leaked, producing a sharp chemical smell that burned the back of Daniel's throat. "Don't touch that," Maya warned. "It could be industrial waste." Daniel photographed the crate and closed the lid. Near the rear door, he found fresh tire tracks pressed into the frozen dirt. They ran behind the shed, crossed the narrow strip of shore, and ended near the lake's edge. Snow had begun filling them, but the tread pattern remained visible. A heavy vehicle had been there recently. Daniel followed the tracks as far as the doorway, then stopped. Going farther would mean leaving Nova and the puppy, disturbing the site, and stepping into questions that belonged to the next stage. He returned to the others. Maya lifted Beacon's carrier. Nova tried to rise beside her. Daniel looked around the shed one final time. The chain, the frozen bowl, Owen's necklace, the broken camera, the Holloway crate, and the tire tracks leading toward the black water. Nova had brought him there to save her puppy, but she had also led him into the first room of a much larger secret. By the time Daniel carried Nova back to the house, the snow had softened into a fine, steady fall that erased their footprints almost as quickly as they made them. Maya followed with Beacon inside the thermal carrier, while Caleb held the broken camera and Owen's silver anchor necklace beneath his coat, as though both might disappear if exposed to the cold. Emily stood in the kitchen when they entered. Her gaze moved from Nova to the carrier, then to the mud and straw on Daniel's boots. She asked what they had found, but Daniel did not answer immediately. He watched Maya place Beacon inside a cardboard box lined with warmed towels beside the stove. The puppy's body was still dangerously cold, yet his breathing had become more regular. Nova lowered herself beside the box, resting her scarred neck near its edge so she could hear every faint movement inside. Maya examined Beacon beneath the kitchen light. As she cleaned the dirt from his legs, she found a narrow scar circling his rear ankle. It was too straight and even to have come from broken wood or another animal. "Someone tied something around him," she said. "Cord? Wire? Maybe a plastic marker." Daniel looked toward Emily. She had gone still near the counter. "Why would anyone mark a newborn puppy?" he asked. Maya's expression hardened. "To identify it, separate it, or move it later." She wrapped Beacon's leg and instructed Caleb to keep the heat pack from touching the puppy's skin directly. Caleb listened with unusual concentration. The boy's guarded posture softened whenever Beacon made a sound, as though protecting something smaller gave him permission to stop defending himself for a few seconds. Nova suddenly rose. Her legs shook, but she ignored the weakness and walked out of the kitchen. Daniel followed her into the hallway. She passed the stairs and stopped in front of a narrow door near the back of the house, the office that had once belonged to Daniel's father. Thomas Brooks had kept boat plans, tax records, and hand-drawn maps of the harbor there. After Thomas died, Daniel had used the room for Coast Guard paperwork and family accounts. Now, a bright brass hasp had been screwed into the old wooden frame. A new padlock hung from it. Daniel touched the metal. It was clean, without rust or dust. "Why is this locked?" he asked. Emily remained at the end of the hallway. "There are financial documents inside." "They were always inside." "I needed them secured." "From whom?" Her eyes shifted briefly toward Caleb. "People have been coming around the property." Daniel looked at Nova. The dog pressed her nose against the bottom of the door, then scratched once. He remembered how she had led him to the shed, how fear had nearly prevented her from crossing its threshold. Here, she showed no fear, only insistence. "Where's the key?" Emily folded her arms. "Daniel, Beacon needs attention. You just came home. We should talk before you start opening things you don't understand." "It's my father's office. It became my responsibility when you disappeared." The words settled between them. Disappeared. Not injured, not hospitalized, not trapped in a maze of military reviews and rehabilitation facilities. Daniel had been absent, but he had not vanished willingly. He crossed to the kitchen drawer where Emily had always kept spare keys. She moved quickly enough to confirm he was looking in the right place. "Don't," she said. Daniel found a brass key beneath a roll of tape and opened the padlock. The room smelled of paper, dust, and lemon cleaner. His father's drafting table had been pushed against the wall. Daniel's Coast Guard certificates were gone, along with the framed photograph of Thomas launching his first fishing boat. In their place stood 3 cardboard file boxes and a steel document safe beneath the desk. Nova entered and stopped beside the boxes. Daniel opened the first one. Inside were envelopes addressed to him at military hospitals, rehabilitation centers, and temporary housing facilities. Some had been returned unopened. Others had been opened carefully and resealed with clear tape. There were letters from benefits offices, medical administrators, and former members of his unit. Several contained updated contact information Emily had claimed never to receive. He looked at her over his shoulder. "You kept these." "I was overwhelmed." "You opened them." "I was trying to understand what was happening." The second box contained bank notices, overdue tax bills, home repair loans, and statements from online gambling platforms. The amounts began small, then multiplied. $20 became $200. $200 became several thousand. Daniel saw repeated withdrawals made late at night, followed by short-term loans carrying brutal interest rates. Emily's face lost what little color it had left. "I can explain." Daniel continued reading. A cream folder bore the logo of Holloway Waterfront Group. Inside was a purchase agreement granting the company development access to Brooks Marine and the adjoining shoreline. The contract included a clause allowing the sale to proceed if Daniel were legally declared missing, incapacitated, or unable to manage his interest in the property. Attached to the agreement was a medical certification Daniel had never seen. His name appeared at the bottom. The signature looked almost correct, The first letter leaned at the right angle, and the final stroke curved the way his usually did. But Daniel knew the movement of his own hand. The copy lacked the small break caused by the numbness in his right fingers. "This isn't mine." Emily stepped into the office. "I didn't sign it." Daniel found 3 more copies of his signature beneath the document, each practiced on blank paper. The safe sat under the desk. Its keypad required 6 digits. Daniel entered his father's birthday. The light flashed red. He tried the date Brooks Marine had opened. Red again. Emily stood behind him, silent. Daniel looked back. "What's the code?" "I don't know." "You changed it?" "No." "Then how did these documents get inside?" She said nothing. Daniel watched her eyes move toward the keypad. He entered the anniversary date of their wedding. The lock clicked open. Inside were payment records showing transfers into Emily's account from a company called North Shore Renewal Services. The name appeared harmless, but the attached registration papers identified Grant Holloway as its controlling owner. A photograph clipped to one statement showed Grant at a development ceremony. He was 51, tall and narrow, with carefully styled gray-black hair, a pale, angular face, and the measured smile of a man who preferred appearing reasonable to being honest. His tailored coat and polished shoes made him look more suited to a private club than a frozen industrial waterfront. Daniel had met men like him before, men who treated calm speech as proof of innocence and other people's desperation as a negotiable asset. The payments to Emily matched several of her largest debts. "You took money from him," Daniel said. "It was assistance." "In exchange for what?" "He said he wanted to help preserve the property." "By taking it?" Emily's voice sharpened. "You weren't here. The roof failed. The furnace died. Taxes kept coming. I didn't know whether you were alive, Daniel." "That doesn't explain forged medical documents." "I told you I didn't forge them." "Then who did?" She looked away. Behind them, Caleb made a sudden sound from the kitchen. Daniel returned to find him holding the camera's memory card beside Maya's laptop. "I remember the password," Caleb said. "North Star. It was the name of the old boat Owen and I fixed together." The card opened. Most files were photographs taken at night. Grainy images showed trucks unloading metal containers near Brooks Marine. In several pictures, Grant Holloway stood beside workers as they lowered barrels into trenches behind the old workshop. Black soil surrounded the excavation, and cloudy liquid stained the snow. A video file showed Owen filming from inside a vehicle. His breathing was audible as the camera focused on Emily arguing with Grant near the main building. The audio was faint, but Daniel heard Emily say, "You said no one would be hurt." Grant moved closer and replied, "Then stop making this difficult." The recording ended when Owen whispered that someone was approaching. Emily stared at the frozen image of herself on the screen. Before Daniel could speak, headlights appeared outside. Ruth Bell entered through the kitchen door without waiting to be invited. Snow covered her red sweater and silver hair. She looked at Nova, Beacon, and the documents spread across the table. The usual strength in her face seemed to have folded inward. "Grant gave the diner money last winter," she said, "called it a community donation." Daniel waited. Ruth's hands tightened around her wet gloves. "He told me trucks would be working near the boatyard at night, said I shouldn't trouble the police over legitimate business. I took the money because the diner roof was failing." "You knew something was wrong." "I knew enough to ask questions." Her voice dropped. "I chose not to." Daniel looked around the kitchen, Beacon breathing inside the box, Nova guarding him, Caleb holding proof left by his missing brother, Emily beside forged documents, and Ruth carrying the weight of purchased silence. The locked office had not given Daniel a complete explanation. It had given him something more dangerous, a pattern. Daniel called the sheriff's office before the storm could bury the tire tracks behind Brooks Marine. He did not trust himself to decide which evidence mattered most, and he trusted the anger in his chest even less. By dawn, Deputy Chief Lena Ortiz stood inside the old storage shed, photographing the iron ring, chain, frozen bowl, and disturbed floorboards. Lena was 43, tall and powerfully built, with olive skin, short black hair streaked with gray, and dark eyes that seemed to measure every room before she entered it. She wore a navy winter uniform beneath a heavy patrol coat, and moved with the steady economy of someone who had learned that rushing often destroyed the truth. Years earlier, Lena had lost a younger partner during a domestic call after witnesses minimized the danger. Since then, she had developed little patience for convenient explanations, and even less for people who called cruelty a misunderstanding. She examined the Holloway crate without opening the leaking jars again. "Environmental Response will collect these," she said. "If this is industrial waste, we preserve the chain of custody from the beginning." Daniel stood near the doorway with Nova resting beside his boots. She was wrapped in Maya's thermal blanket, her head raised whenever Lena approached the wall where she had been chained. Beacon remained at the house under Maya's care. Caleb had refused to leave the broken camera behind, but Lena convinced him to store the memory card in an evidence sleeve after making a verified copy. By 9 o'clock, Sarah Whitman arrived at the Brooks home carrying a leather briefcase and a snow-covered folder. Sarah was 45, slender and slightly under average height, with pale skin, sharp green eyes, and auburn hair cut neatly at her jaw. She wore a charcoal wool coat over a dark suit and spoke in a controlled, precise manner that made every unnecessary word seem expensive. She specialized in waterfront property disputes and environmental easements. Daniel learned that her father had lost a family farm to a fraudulent development agreement when she was in college, an experience that had turned her into a lawyer who treated deceptive contracts as personal enemies. Sarah spread the documents from the locked office across the dining table. She studied the forged signature, the medical certification, Emily's debts, and the purchase agreement without offering comfort. "This contract is not complete," she said. "That helps you. But Holloway has been building a case that you abandoned the property or lack the capacity to control it. I never abandoned anything. The facts support you. The paperwork was designed to bury those facts." Lena placed photographs from the boatyard beside Sarah's files. The images from Owen's camera showed Grant Holloway standing near trenches while workers lowered containers into the ground. Another sequence showed liquid leaking from a damaged barrel toward a drainage channel leading to Lake Superior. Sarah's mouth tightened. "He does not only want the land. He needs control of the land before anyone investigates what is underneath it." Daniel looked at the photograph of black soil spreading across the snow. He planned to build over the evidence. "Or remove it once he owned the property," Lena said. "Either way, the sale and the dumping support each other." Ruth Bell arrived shortly afterward carrying a brown envelope and a spiral notebook. She had changed out of her diner apron but still smelled faintly of coffee and fried onions. Her usual blunt confidence had become quieter, though she kept her back straight as she placed the envelope on the table. "This is what Grant's man gave me," she said. Lena photographed it before opening it. Inside were $50 bills and a typed note thanking Ruth for her cooperation during waterfront assessment activity. The notebook contained dates, approximate times, vehicle descriptions, and weather conditions for trucks Ruth had seen traveling toward Brooks Marine at night. "I wrote them down after I took the money," Ruth admitted. "I suppose some part of me wanted proof that I had not imagined what I was helping ignore." Lena looked at her. "Why didn't you report it?" "Because the diner roof was failing, and cowardice sounds practical when it is keeping snow out of a kitchen." Daniel understood the answer without forgiving it. He had learned that people rarely walked into betrayal in a single step. They arrived through small compromises, each one presented as temporary. Caleb sat at the end of the table with Maya's laptop. He had spent hours searching the recovered memory card. Most files were photographs, but one video had been buried inside a folder labeled engine parts. He opened it. Owen appeared on the screen inside a parked vehicle. He had Daniel's first impression of him from Caleb's description. 24, broad-shouldered, with unruly brown hair, tired green eyes, and an open face that had not yet learned to hide fear. His confidence seemed natural rather than performed, but his hands shook as he adjusted the camera. "If Caleb finds this," Owen said, "I'm sorry I didn't tell you everything. Holloway is burying chemical drums at Brooks Marine. I copied the dates and truck numbers. I'm taking the evidence to the sheriff tomorrow. If something happens before I get there, it wasn't an accident." Caleb's face became blank in the way people sometimes protected themselves from breaking in public. Daniel placed a hand on the back of the boy's chair, but did not speak. Emily had remained near the kitchen window through the entire morning. She wore the same cream sweater from the night before, now wrinkled at the sleeves. Her blonde hair hung loosely around her face, and the careful composure Daniel once associated with her had fallen away. She looked exhausted, cornered, and strangely relieved that the room had finally filled with people who would not accept silence. Sarah turned to her. "Mrs. Brooks, the financial records show repeated payments from a company controlled by Grant Holloway. This is the time to explain them." Emily's eyes moved toward Daniel. He said nothing. She sat slowly. "The roof started leaking during the first winter," she began. "Then the furnace failed. Insurance denied part of the claim because of the age of the building. I used a credit card. Then another." Her voice sounded distant, as though she were describing someone else's mistakes. "The gambling started with $20. I thought I could win enough to pay one repair bill. Then I lost, so I tried to recover it. Every time I lost, I believed the next game would return what the last one took." Daniel remembered the statements from the locked room. The amounts had grown precisely that way. "Grant came after a contractor mentioned the debt," Emily continued. "He paid the emergency loan and said Brooks Marine could solve everything. He told me the property was wasted on an old boatyard." "And when you refused?" Sarah asked. "He reminded me that Daniel was gone. He said the county could declare him incapacitated if the correct doctor signed the correct paper." Daniel kept his hands flat on the table. "Who forged my signature?" "I didn't." Emily looked at him. "Grant brought the documents already prepared. He told me they were temporary drafts." "Temporary," Ruth repeated quietly, as if recognizing the word. Emily closed her eyes. Nova kept blocking the survey crews. She stood in front of their trucks. She snapped at Hank when he tried to enter the workshop. "Hank Dorsey?" Lena asked. Emily nodded. Hank was Grant's operations supervisor, a 46-year-old former dock worker with a thick chest, shaved head, and a red knit cap he wore in nearly every season. He had a reputation for solving problems without asking whether the solution was legal. Daniel had never met him, but Caleb's description of the man dragging Nova now had a name. "Grant said Nova was dangerous," Emily continued. "He said if she bit someone, animal control would destroy her. He told me confinement was the only way to protect her." "You allowed Hank to chain her in the shed," Daniel said. Emily's mouth trembled. "Yes." Nova raised her head at the sound of Hank's name. "I brought food and water at first," Emily said. "Every day. Then she started growling whenever I came close. I told myself she had turned wild." "She was chained," Daniel said. "She was afraid." "I know that now." "You knew it then." Emily looked down at her hands. After a long silence, she said, "I heard the puppies." The room seemed to narrow around Daniel. I heard them crying beneath the floor, she continued. I kept telling myself I would call Maya the next morning. I said tomorrow so many times that it stopped meaning a day. Maya stood near Nova, her expression hard but controlled. What happened when Nova disappeared? Lena asked. Grant told me Hank would move her somewhere safe until the sale was finished. I thought he meant a kennel. You never asked where? I was afraid of the answer. Daniel looked at Nova's scarred neck. Hank took her into the forest. Emily's head snapped up. I didn't know that. Caleb spoke from the end of the table. She got away. Daniel looked at Nova. The path was clear now. Hank had abandoned her outside the city, but Nova had survived, returned to Brooks Marine, and continued feeding the one puppy left alive beneath the floor. She had done what every person in the room had failed to do. She had come back. Emily began to cry, but Daniel felt no urge to comfort her. Her confession did not erase the chain, the empty spaces in the nest, or the mornings Nova had crossed the frozen harbor carrying food. Lena closed her notebook. This statement will need to be recorded formally. Holloway and Dorsey will be investigated for fraud, environmental violations, and animal cruelty. Your cooperation matters, Mrs. Brooks, but it does not remove your responsibility. Emily nodded without looking up. Daniel rested his hand near Nova's shoulder, careful not to touch the healing wounds around her neck. The truth had finally entered the room, but it did not feel like release. It felt like the moment before consequences began. The truth had barely settled over the Brooks house when Caleb's phone vibrated against the dining table. The sound was small, but everyone in the room stopped. Caleb stared at the screen, his thin face tightening as he read the sender's name. Daniel watched the boy's guarded expression fracture into disbelief. It's Owen's account, Caleb said. The email had been sent automatically at noon. There was no greeting and no explanation. Only a set of coordinates, a photograph of an abandoned lighthouse surrounded by snow, and one sentence. When the lake freezes, they will return to erase everything. Lena Ortiz took the phone without touching the screen more than necessary. She forwarded the message to the sheriff's digital evidence unit, then studied the coordinates. They pointed north of the border, near the industrial shoreline outside Thunder Bay, Canada. This was not written by someone expecting to be safe, she said. Caleb stood beside her, gripping the edge of the table. Does it mean he's alive? It means the account was programmed by someone who expected a specific event to trigger the message. Lena looked toward the window, where the frozen harbor had begun disappearing beneath evening fog. But the photograph may tell us where he was when he created it. Daniel examined the lighthouse image. The concrete tower leaned toward the lake, its white paint stripped by years of wind. A rusted navigation platform extended from one side, and a faded red service building stood behind it. He had seen similar structures during Coast Guard patrols, but this one carried a small Canadian maritime marker near the base. Lena contacted authorities in Thunder Bay, while Caleb opened every saved message he had ever received from his brother. Daniel remained near Nova and Beacon. The puppy lay inside a padded box beside the stove, his small body warmer and stronger than the night before. Whenever Nova rose more than a few feet away, Beacon released a thin, urgent cry. Nova immediately turned back, touching her nose to the edge of the box until he became quiet again. She had survived chains, starvation, and a winter forest, yet the sound of her puppy still controlled every step she took. Maya checked Nova's temperature and replaced the dressing around her neck. She needs 2 days without excitement, she said. Daniel looked at Nova's alert ears. I don't think anyone explained that to her. I am explaining it to you. Maya's voice was firm, but fatigue darkened the skin beneath her eyes.
She had remained at the house to monitor both dogs and had slept less than an hour. Daniel knew her sharpness came from fear rather than irritation. She had seen too many rescued animals survive the first crisis only to die because people mistook temporary strength for recovery. Lena's phone rang 20 minutes later. She moved into the hallway, speaking first with a Canadian officer and then with someone from Federal Border Services. When she returned, her expression had changed. They found him. Caleb did not breathe. Owen was treated at a free clinic in Thunder Bay 6 months ago under the name Aaron Pike, Lena continued. Broken ribs, facial injuries, and a damaged shoulder.
He told the clinic he had been attacked during a robbery. That wasn't a robbery, Daniel said. Lena shook her head. The clinic has a contact address. Canadian officers are checking it now. Caleb's phone rang before she finished. The number was blocked. He answered with both hands around the device. Hello? For several seconds, no one spoke on the other end. Then a man's voice said, Cal? Caleb closed his eyes. Daniel recognized Owen's voice from the recovered video, though it now sounded weaker and more cautious. Where are you? Caleb demanded. Why didn't you call me? I couldn't. You could have tried. I did try. Then Hank found the first phone. Daniel moved closer, careful not to crowd Caleb. The boy placed the call on speaker at Lena's request. Owen explained that Hank Dorsey had confronted him after discovering the photographs of the chemical dumping. Hank and another worker had beaten him inside a warehouse, destroyed his main camera, and warned that Caleb would disappear next if Owen went to the police. Owen escaped with the memory card hidden inside his boot. He crossed into Canada using cash, temporary work, and the name of a former co-worker who had died years earlier. You let me think you were dead, Caleb said. I thought being dead to you was safer than leading them to you. Caleb turned away, his shoulders shaking. Daniel understood the cruelty inside Owen's choice. Protection made without permission could feel exactly like abandonment to the person left behind. Lena stepped closer to the phone. Mr. Price, we have your camera files, testimony from Emily Brooks, and physical evidence connecting Holloway's company to illegal dumping. We need you to return and give a formal statement. Owen was silent. Caleb wiped his face with his sleeve. Come back. I'm not safe because you vanished. I'm just alone. The words entered the room without drama, and that made them harder to ignore. Owen finally answered. I'll come. Lena arranged for Canadian authorities to protect him until transportation could be coordinated. The call ended before Caleb was ready, but for the first time since Daniel had met him, the boy's fear had somewhere specific to go. Emily entered from the living room carrying her phone. She had changed into a dark sweater and tied her blonde hair back, but no amount of order could hide the exhaustion in her face. There are messages from Grant, she said. I deleted some, but they might still be recoverable. Lena accepted the device. Several messages remained visible. Grant had demanded that Emily sign the final transfer documents, warned her that Daniel's return would complicate her financial exposure, and reminded her that silence protected everyone. The most recent message had arrived less than an hour earlier. The property issue will be corrected tonight. Stay inside and answer no calls. Daniel read it twice. He knows the sale has been frozen, Sarah said from the end of the table. The lawyer had been filing emergency notices with the county recorder, the title company, and environmental regulators throughout the afternoon. Once those notices reached Holloway, he knew the land could no longer change hands quietly. He'll move the evidence, Lena said. Ruth Bell, who had returned to the diner, called moments later. Her voice crackled through the speaker beneath waves of static. "I'm listening to Frank's old marine radio," she said. Frank Bell, Ruth's late husband, had been a commercial fisherman who spent 40 years on Lake Superior and trusted radio traffic more than weather forecasts. After his death, Ruth kept his equipment above the diner pantry because she could not bring herself to throw away the last machine that had carried his voice home through storms. "I heard 2 boats discussing a late pickup near the Brooks shoreline," Ruth continued. "No vessel names. One man mentioned drums and said the road crew would handle the fire." Lena's posture sharpened. "Did he say when?" "Before midnight." A movement near the back door drew Daniel's attention. Nova had left Beacon's box and was sniffing a coil of rope recovered from the shed. Lena had placed it in a temporary evidence bag after noticing fresh fibers near the tire tracks. Nova pressed her nose against the plastic, then recoiled. Her fur rose along her spine. "Hank," Caleb said. "He always smelled like diesel and cigarettes." Nova began scratching at the door. Beacon cried behind her. She turned immediately, limped back to the box, and touched his head. Then she looked at Daniel and returned to the door. Once, twice. A choice between her puppy and the danger outside seemed to pull her body in opposite directions. "You are not taking her," Maya said. Daniel reached for his coat. "I'm not." Lena radioed for additional deputies and ordered them toward Brooks Marine without lights or sirens. She warned Daniel to remain behind her and not disturb any evidence. Daniel agreed because arguing would waste time. Maya moved Beacon's box farther from the door, then helped Daniel settle Nova beside him. "Stay with your puppy," she told the dog. Nova waited until Daniel stepped outside. Then she forced herself upright, crossed the kitchen, pushed through the partially open door, and limped toward the Bronco. Before anyone could stop her, she placed her front paws on the running board and dragged herself onto the rear seat. Maya stared at Daniel. "Take her out." Daniel opened the door. Nova lay against the seat, breathing hard but refusing to move. Her amber eyes remained fixed on the road leading toward Brooks Marine. Beacon's cries came faintly from the house. Nova's ears twitched, but she did not climb down. Daniel understood. She was not abandoning her puppy. She was trying to stop the people who might return to finish what they had started. Maya wrapped another thermal blanket around her and pointed a warning finger at Daniel. "She stays in the vehicle unless I decide otherwise." Lena's patrol SUV turned onto the road ahead of them. Caleb climbed into the Bronco with Owen's copied files secured inside his coat. Emily remained on the porch beside Beacon, holding her phone as evidence and looking toward the property she had nearly surrendered. Daniel started the engine. Below the hill, beyond the fog and frozen shoreline, a faint orange glow appeared near Brooks Marine. Someone had already arrived. Daniel followed Lena's patrol vehicle down the narrow road toward Brooks Marine. The orange glow he had seen from the hill came from 2 portable work lights positioned beside the old storage shed, not from a fire. At least, not yet. Through the blowing snow, he could see 3 men moving metal drums from behind the workshop onto a flatbed truck. One of them wore a red knit cap. Hank Dorsey. He was broader than Daniel had expected, with a heavy chest, thick arms, and a shaved head visible beneath the cap when the wind lifted it. His face was square and rough, with a broken nose that leaned slightly left. He moved like a man accustomed to using strength before conversation. Even from a distance, Daniel recognized the mixture of diesel fuel and cigarette smoke Caleb had described. Lena stopped her vehicle across the road, blocking the exit. "Sheriff's office," she shouted. "Step away from the truck and keep your hands visible." The workers froze. Hank did not. He lowered the drum he was holding, then glanced toward the dark shoreline, as though calculating whether the lake offered a better escape than the road. Daniel climbed from the Bronco. Maya immediately opened the rear door to check Nova, but the dog pushed past her before either of them could stop her. She landed badly, nearly collapsing, then forced herself toward the flatbed. "Nova!" Maya called. "Daniel, get her back!" Daniel followed, but Nova's attention had fixed on the truck. Her nose moved rapidly along the rear tire, the bumper, and a coil of rope hanging from the bed. She began scratching at a metal toolbox bolted behind the cab. Hank stepped toward her. "Keep that dog away from my equipment." Nova recoiled at his voice. Her body dropped close to the snow, and the scars around her neck seemed to tighten beneath the fur. Daniel placed himself between them. "You don't touch her again." Hank's hands closed into fists. Before he could answer, headlights swept across the property. A black SUV stopped near the main workshop, and Grant Holloway stepped out. Grant wore a dark wool overcoat, polished boots, and no hat, as if winter itself had been instructed not to inconvenience him. His gray-black hair remained carefully arranged, and his pale, angular face carried the controlled expression Daniel remembered from the photograph in the locked office. He looked less like a man caught moving toxic waste at night than an executive arriving to correct an accounting error. "Deputy Chief Ortiz," Grant said, "this is private property under active commercial assessment." "The transaction has been frozen," Lena replied. Her body camera faced him. "No one here is authorized to remove anything." Grant's gaze moved to Daniel. "Mr. Brooks has spent years receiving treatment for psychological trauma. I would be cautious before treating his suspicions as facts." Daniel felt the old anger rise, clean and immediate. Grant was not defending himself. He was building a version of Daniel that could be dismissed. Lena remained still. "The chemical containers, forged documents, and witness statements are not symptoms of Mr. Brooks's medical history." While Grant argued, Nova continued clawing at the toolbox. Lena ordered Hank to unlock it. He claimed he had no key, but one of the workers quietly pointed toward Hank's coat pocket. Inside the box lay gloves, bolt cutters, lengths of wire, and a thin chain matching the marks around Nova's neck. Beneath them was Owen's old leather collar, the one Caleb said his brother had worn around his wrist when working near heavy machinery. Beside it sat a small, rusted key. Lena photographed each object before lifting the key into an evidence bag. Daniel remembered the worn mark beside the iron ring in the shed. That opened the lock on Nova's chain. Hank's face changed. Caleb saw Owen's collar and lunged before Daniel realized what he was doing. The boy crossed the space between them with both fists raised. Daniel caught him around the chest and pulled him back. "Let me go!" Caleb shouted. "He hurt Owen!" Hank took one step away, more afraid of the evidence than the boy. Daniel held Caleb until the struggle weakened. "Hitting him won't bring your brother home. He deserves it." "Maybe, but you don't give him the power to decide who you become." The words felt directed at Daniel as much as Caleb. Another vehicle came down the road. A Canadian police escort stopped near Lena's patrol car, and Owen Price stepped out from the passenger side. He looked thinner than in the video, with one shoulder held lower than the other and a pale scar crossing his left eyebrow. His brown hair had grown to his collar, and months of hiding had sharpened his face. Yet Daniel could still see the reckless courage Caleb had described, the quality that had driven Owen to gather evidence before he understood how dangerous the truth could become. Caleb tore free from Daniel and ran to him. The brothers collided beside the patrol car. Owen held Caleb tightly, his injured shoulder shaking from the effort. Then Owen raised a phone. "I recorded Grant the night Hank found me," he told Lena. "I kept a copy online." The audio played through the speaker. Grant's voice was unmistakable. "Move the drums before the ground freezes solid. Burn the shed if you have to. And get rid of the dog before she attracts attention." Grant's calm expression finally broke. Hank looked at him. "You said there wouldn't be any recording." Grant turned sharply. "Be quiet." The order revealed more than denial would have. Hank's shoulders sank. He told me to chain the dog. Then he told me to take her north and leave her in the woods. He said she would either disappear or freeze. He looked toward Owen. And he told me to scare him. I didn't mean for it to go that far. "You broke 3 ribs," Owen said. Hank looked down. More headlights appeared. Ruth Steiner van stopped near the fence, followed by Emily's car. Ruth climbed out, holding her phone at arm's length, broadcasting the drums, the Holloway logos, and the police activity to hundreds of local viewers. "If they bury this tomorrow," she said, "at least the town will have seen it tonight." Emily stepped from the other vehicle, carrying Beacon in Maya's insulated carrier. Her face was pale, but she walked directly toward Lena's camera. "Grant paid my debts," she said. "He provided the false medical documents and pressured me to sign the property agreement. He ordered Nova confined, and I allowed it. Everything I told Deputy Chief Ortiz is true." Grant stared at her as though betrayal belonged only to other people. Then he moved. He ran to the black SUV, slammed the door, and accelerated before Lena could reach him. The vehicle struck a survey post, crossed the icy service road, and headed toward the old launch pier. "Grant, stop!" Lena shouted. The SUV hit a patch of exposed ice. Its rear end swung sideways, smashed through the wooden railing, and dropped nose first into Lake Superior. For 1 second, everything became silent. Then the ice broke beneath the vehicle. The SUV began sinking. Daniel ran. His injured knee nearly failed on the pier, but years of Coast Guard training moved faster than pain. He grabbed a rescue line from the emergency cabinet beside the launch ramp and tied one end around a steel post. Grant struck the inside of the driver's window as freezing water rose around him. Daniel hated him. He hated the chain, the dead puppies, Owen's injuries, and the way Emily's fear had been turned into a weapon. Leaving Grant in the lake would have required almost nothing. That was why Daniel jumped. The cold stopped his breath. He forced himself toward the SUV, broke the side window with the metal hook on the rescue line, and reached inside. Grant fought blindly, dragging Daniel beneath the surface. "Stop fighting!" Daniel shouted. "Take the line!" Grant finally obeyed. Daniel pulled him through the window while Lena and Owen hauled from the pier. They reached the ice edge seconds before the SUV disappeared into the black water. Deputies rolled Grant onto the snow. He coughed violently, shivering beneath Lena's emergency blanket. Lena placed him under arrest before the ambulance arrived. Daniel barely heard the words. Nova had collapsed beside the flatbed. Maya knelt over her, checking her gums and breathing. "Her temperature's dropping. She's exhausted." Emily opened Beacon's carrier. The puppy cried, a thin but urgent sound. Nova's ear moved. Maya brought the carrier closer. "Listen to him, Nova. He still needs you." Beacon cried again. Nova drew one shallow breath, then another. Her amber eyes opened and found Daniel. He dropped beside her, placing his hand carefully against her shoulder. "I'm here," he said. Maya and the paramedics lifted Nova onto a stretcher. Beacon remained beside her inside the warmed carrier as they rushed both dogs toward the clinic. Behind Daniel, Grant sat handcuffed beneath flashing lights. Alive, because the man he had tried to destroy had refused to become cruel. Nova survived the night at North Shore Animal Clinic, though Maya refused to call it a miracle while there was still work to be done. Her temperature rose slowly, the antibiotics began controlling the infection, and the fluids restored enough strength for her to lift her head whenever Beacon cried from the heated box beside her. Daniel remained in the clinic chair until morning, his wet clothes replaced by borrowed scrubs and a wool blanket around his shoulders. His injured knee had swollen from the rescue in Lake Superior, but he barely noticed it. For several hours, his world narrowed to the rise and fall of Nova's chest. When she finally opened her amber eyes and pressed one paw against his hand, Daniel lowered his head and allowed himself to believe she might return home. Not as the fearless dog he remembered from 4 years earlier, but as the living animal in front of him, scarred, exhausted, and still capable of trust. Recovery came through small victories rather than dramatic moments. Nova drank without help. She stood for several seconds. She allowed Maya to clean the wounds around her neck without trying to hide. Beacon gained weight quickly and developed a loud, impatient bark that seemed impossible for such a small body. His sable fur thickened, his legs strengthened, and he followed Nova around the clinic with the unsteady determination of a puppy who had entered the world beneath frozen floorboards and had no intention of wasting the life he had been given. Nova watched him constantly. Even while resting, one ear remained turned toward him. The legal case moved more slowly, but it moved. The key from Hank's toolbox matched the lock that had secured Nova's chain. Chemical residue from the drums matched contamination found beneath Brooks Marine. Owen's recordings, Emily's messages, Ruth's payment envelope, and the forged documents created a case Grant Holloway's attorneys could not easily dismiss. Grant was charged with fraud, bribery, illegal disposal of industrial waste, conspiracy, and animal cruelty. Hank Dorsey faced additional charges for assaulting Owen, threatening Caleb, and abandoning Nova in the forest. Hank eventually agreed to cooperate, not from remorse, but because he understood Grant would sacrifice him first. Daniel found no satisfaction in that realization. Justice did not return the lost puppies or erase the months Nova had spent chained in darkness. It simply prevented the men responsible from continuing as though suffering were another operating expense. Emily accepted responsibility without asking Daniel to protect her from the consequences. Through Sarah Whitman, she signed corrections to the property records and surrendered any claim based on the fraudulent agreement. She entered a residential treatment program for gambling addiction and began completing court-ordered community service at a financial recovery center. Her letters to Daniel arrived through Sarah rather than directly. Some contained apologies, others contained practical information about debts, accounts, and the house. Daniel answered only when necessary. He did not return to the marriage, and he did not promise that time would rebuild what fear and deception had damaged. Yet he also refused to turn hatred into another chain connecting them. Distance became the most honest form of mercy he could offer. Sarah successfully restored Daniel's full ownership of Brooks Marine. Environmental investigators temporarily closed part of the shoreline while contaminated soil was removed. Owen joined the cleanup crews after receiving certification as an environmental field technician. Months of hiding had changed him. He remained broad-shouldered and restless, but the reckless confidence Daniel had seen in the old video had matured into caution. Owen no longer believed courage meant facing every danger alone. He documented samples carefully, followed procedure, and called Caleb at the end of every shift. The brothers moved into a small cedar house near the boatyard. Caleb returned to school through a flexible program while working afternoons beside Daniel. He was still thin, quiet, and suspicious of easy promises, but he no longer slept in storerooms or kept all his belongings inside one coat. Beacon chose him almost immediately. The puppy followed Caleb through the workshop, stole his gloves, and slept beneath his chair. Under Daniel's supervision, Caleb began introducing Beacon to scent games, obstacle drills, and basic search commands. Beacon failed often and enthusiastically. He became distracted by snow, boots, food, and his own tail. But he always returned to Caleb's voice. Ruth transformed her guilt into something useful. Bell's Harbor Diner began collecting pet food, blankets, and veterinary vouchers for families struggling to care for their animals. She named the project the Full Bowl Program and placed a wooden donation box beside the cash register. Ruth still wore flour-stained aprons and spoke as though kindness were a task everyone had been neglecting, but she no longer accepted silence as the price of survival. When local fishermen offered supplies, she assigned them delivery routes before they could change their minds. Daniel and Maya rebuilt the old storage shed rather than tearing it down. At first, Daniel wanted every board associated with Nova's suffering removed. Maya persuaded him that changing the purpose of the building could mean more than destroying it. Together, they stripped away the rotten floor, removed the iron ring under official supervision, and replaced the damaged walls with insulated cedar. They added heated kennels, a veterinary room, training lanes, and a small dock for water rescue exercises. They called the center North Star Canine and Lake Rescue. Maya became its medical director while continuing to operate her clinic. Her relationship with Daniel developed quietly, without declarations either of them was ready to trust. She brought him coffee when he worked too late. He repaired the broken steps outside her clinic. They argued about Nova's exercise limits, building permits, and whether Beacon was intelligent or merely lucky. Daniel learned that Maya did not use affection to avoid difficult truths. Maya learned that Daniel's silence was not always rejection. Sometimes it was the space he needed before speaking honestly. Neither promised forever. They simply kept showing up. Emily visited the completed center once in early spring. She looked healthier but uncertain, wearing a plain blue coat and carrying no gifts. Daniel met her outside the training room. Nova stood several feet away with Beacon beside her. "I came to apologize to her," Emily said. Daniel did not tell her that Nova could not understand the words. Some apologies were meant to change the person speaking them. Emily lowered herself to one knee, but did not reach out. "I failed you," she whispered. "You trusted our home, and I made it dangerous." Nova watched her calmly. She neither approached nor retreated. After several seconds, she turned away and touched her nose to Beacon's shoulder. Emily accepted the boundary. She stood, thanked Daniel for allowing the visit, and left without asking whether she could return. Daniel watched her car disappear beyond the harbor road. He felt grief, but not the old rage. The difference mattered. By late spring, the last contaminated soil had been removed. North Star welcomed its first injured stray, and its first group of teenagers learning search and rescue skills. Caleb and Beacon trained together along the shoreline, the boy giving commands while the young dog raced through the grass with more confidence than accuracy. One morning, Daniel stood beside Lake Superior as sunrise spread gold across the water. Nova leaned her healed shoulder against his leg. Her coat had grown thick again, though the silver scar around her neck remained visible. In the distance, Beacon followed Caleb between training markers while Owen repaired a section of fence and Maya watched from the rescue doorway. Daniel did not recover the 4 years he had lost. Nova did not forget the chain. Caleb and Owen could not erase the months of separation, and Emily's accountability could not restore their marriage. But Brooks Marine had become a place where frightened animals found warmth, wounded people learned responsibility, and no one was asked to pretend that healing meant forgetting. Above the entrance, a new wooden sign moved gently in the lake wind. "No life is too lost to be found." Daniel rested his hand against Nova's neck. Beacon barked at the rising sun. Caleb laughed, and Nova's tail struck Daniel's leg once. For the first time since returning home, Daniel did not feel that he was standing among the remains of his old life. He was standing at the beginning of a new one. Sometimes, God does not answer our prayers by restoring everything we have lost. Sometimes, He gives us the strength to build something new from the places where we were once broken. Daniel could not recover the 4 years taken from him. Nova could not forget the chain around her neck. Caleb and Owen could not erase the loneliness they had endured. But through faith, truth, courage, and forgiveness, God turned an abandoned boat shed into a place of rescue and transformed their deepest wounds into a light for others. Now we would love to hear from you. Do you believe Emily deserved a second chance? Or were some betrayals too painful to forgive? And what would you have done if you were in Daniel's position? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe God can still create hope after the darkest season, write Amen in the comments. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next powerful story of loyalty, faith, justice, and second chances. May God bless you, protect your family, and remind you that no life is ever too lost to be found.